Welcome to Biafra National Television and Radio, BNTV Arrow, Voice of the Rising Sun, official broadcast station of the state of Biafra. Thank you for joining us on Rising Sun News. I'm your host, Pointer. Here are the headlines. Special message to President John Dramani Mahama of the Republic of Ghana. Response to the Nigerian Armed Forces Remembrance Day 2026. Dave UMAHI has exposed himself. Now, the details. The Biafran Provincial Government, BPG, Government of the State of Biafra, have through the Office of the Head of State, BPG, and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the State of Biafra, House of the Rising Sun, Temple of Peace, National Provincial Capital, Late Eda, acknowledge the efforts of President John Dramani Mahama of the Republic of Ghana as he sets to file a resolution at the United Nations on the 26th March 2026 to have the transatlantic slave trade declared as one of the greatest crimes against humanity, describing his move to become a landmark achievement for the present and coming generations of indigenous Biafrans. The Biafran Provincial Government of the State of Biafra, stated that indigenous Biafrans of the Aro-Okibo Confederacy are victims of the transatlantic slave trade, orchestrated by the British imperialists through slavery, colonial rule, Christianity, and Western lifestyle, which distorted our history, cultures, and traditions. He was informed about the collapse of the Aro-Okibo Confederacy in the Anglo-Aro War of 1901 to 1902 by the British force, whom destroyed and desecrated the notable Ubinipabi Shrine, which they renamed the Long Juju Shrine, leading to the exile of the then Eze Aro, Eze Kanu Okoro, and looting of sacred and traditional artifacts of priestly staffs, bronze seals, and CBD scrolls, which can be traced to the British Museum, University of Oxford collections, private royal collections, etc. This act against the Aro-Okibo Confederacy is a genocidal act described as cultural genocide, defined according to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights as, I quote, the intentional destruction of a group's knowledge system, historical memory, and educational autonomy with the aim of subjugating its identity, end of quote. The Office of the Head of State, BPG, and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the State of Biafra called for UNESCO protection of the Ubinipabi Shrine, reclaiming of shrine parts, reactivation of ancestral knowledge, and return of looted artifacts, and also a practical approach to the recommendation by the chairperson of the Indigenous Peoples Permanent Forum report on the 24th section, urging states and the United Nations system to ensure indigenous peoples are included in decision-making processes and to recognize indigenous peoples and integrate indigenous rights and self-determination. The special message signed by General Innocent N.O.G. GCSB solicited intervention for indigenous Biafrans, which include dedicated funding and technical support for engaging in the Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) 2030 processes, reminding about the people's right to establish and control their own educational system, as covenanted in Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights (UDHR) and Article 14 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights (ICESCR), including the UN General Assembly, which declares that the ultimate goal of the international decade for the eradication of colonialism is the free exercise of the right to self-determination by the peoples in accordance with Resolution 1514 SV and all other relevant resolutions and decisions adopted by the UNGA, which is the United Nations General Assembly. Why the defunct governors of the defunct eastern region of Nigeria, now the state of Biafra, made up of the states of Abia, Imo, Enugu, Ebonyi, Delta, Rivers, Cross River, Anambra, Akwa Ibom, and Bayelsa, have made sycophantic speeches in remembrance and celebration of the occupying Nigerian terrorist armed forces, held annually on 15 January. Peace and unity is still far-fetched in the region they purportedly administrate, as division and unchecked aggression continue to grow against the will of the indigenous peoples. Duly note that the Biafran provincial government of the state of Biafra, has significantly commemorated 15 January annually as the Biafran Massacre Remembrance Day for the sake of indigenous Biafrans who were massacred and violated by the occupying government and terrorist armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria since 1953 to date. The response from the Biafran provincial government of the state of Biafra, described the speeches about peace, justice, and fairness by the defunct governors as hypocritical, as they have conspiratorially downplayed the matter concerning the indigenes, whom are indigenous Biafrans. Of what significance is the remembrance and celebration when the inalienable right to self-determination has become a crime of treasonable felony for indigenous Biafrans, and no remedy for the scars of division and internal conflict against indigenous Biafrans? What about the Biafran soldiers of the Nigerian Biafran Civil War of 1967 to 1970? Have they been forgotten or ever been remembered? Are their names also mentioned for their sacrifice, bravery, and dedication in service in their land, which is the defunct eastern region of Nigeria, now the state of Biafra? Continuing, stating, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, covenanted in Article 35 that indigenous peoples have the right to determine the responsibilities of individuals to their communities. End of quote. Dave Umahi, the occupying Nigerian Minister of Works and former governor of defunct Ebonyi State, in a press chat exposed his emotions and tantrums, in which he stated that the progress of the defunct eastern region of Nigeria, now the state of Biafra, lies in infrastructural projects only. Dave Umahi should be enlightened that it is the responsibility of the occupying Nigerian state for such projects to be manifested for Igbo Biafrans, even as he cunningly opted not to mention that previous administration were responsible for the second Niger Bridge and other projects which he mentioned during his press conference. The former governor of Ebonyi State has become a sugar-coated politician, impersonating as a spokesperson for the Igbo Biafrans. He is to note that Article 39 of the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, proclaims, I quote, indigenous peoples have the right to have access to financial and technical assistance from states and through international cooperation for the enjoyment of the rights contained in this declaration. End of quote. The United Nations is hereby notified that Dave Umahi is not the spokesperson for Igbo Biafrans, nor any pro-Biafran group, and he is also a collaborator in the Kangaroo Court Sentence Conviction of Mazi Oku Kanu, the IPOB leader. In essence, the Uburu Ohazara-born indigene should be made aware that he will never be honored for his efforts in the killings and marginalization of indigenous Biafrans, and should always remember that, I quote, when a fool keeps quiet, you will think he has abundance of wisdom, and when he opens his mouth, you will know he is a fool. End of quote. That brings to conclusion Rising Sun News on Biafran National Television and Radio, BNTVR, Voice of the Rising Sun, official broadcast station of the state of Biafra. Here are the headlines again. Special message to President John Dramani Mahama of the Republic of Ghana. Response to the Nigerian Armed Forces Remembrance Day 2026. Dave Umahi has exposed himself. Remember to follow us on all our social media platforms on Biafran National Television and Radio, BNTVR.
You're down.